Welcome. I'm Dr. Rex Gatto, Gatto Associates, a consulting firm located here in Pittsburgh. And today we are going to visit with Dr. Donald McAleer from North Shore Neuroscience in Erie, PA. Welcome, Donald.
Rex, good to see you again.
Thank you. Good to see you.
Pleasure to be here with you today and talk about important things.
Well, that's always good. Important things. Both of us are psychologists, so I thought today we would share some ideas in some areas that people generally don't think of psychologists being in charge of. I thought one of the things that we would do today, because of legislation that's pending in Pennsylvania, and in the news a great deal, we hear about concussions. So I thought it might be of interest to talk about sports performance, and then maybe talk a little bit about concussion and traumatic brain injury, or as we know it, TBI. So talk a little bit, first of all, about sports performance. How are psychologists involved in the area of sports performance?
There's a number of aspects to that, Rex. Serious athletes have a lot of mental preparation in addition to the physical preparation that they have to go through. One of my partners, for example, is currently training a long-distance swimmer who is going to be going for the record of swimming across Lake Erie this year.
That sounds pretty interesting.
This is the second time this fella has done it and has been coached by one of my partners along the way. And a lot of it has to do with the mental preparation of putting yourself and enabling yourself to go through such a rigorous training program to prepare for that. And then actually when you're in the process of the competition itself, having strategies that you can call on to keep yourself at your peak performance, even especially in a long distance swim, which is about 20 miles across Lake Erie, in the middle of the lake. You know, what are you going to do to get through those hard times that when you're faced with waves and some near exhaustion?
You know, it really seems that the area of psychology just keeps expanding and expanding in greater areas. We see psychologists involved more in the law. We see psychologists involved more in the medical model within, if you will, medical practices. And now we're seeing in sports and sports performance. Let's talk briefly about sports injuries and focus on concussion. That's really been in the news a great deal lately. I know that there's legislation pending in Pennsylvania. We also hear about it on the news. And of course in Pittsburgh we have our best player, one of our best players I should say, Sidney Crosby, who's had concussion for a long time. I also have a client who was in an automobile accident in January and he is still not back to work. So what do we know about concussion and how do psychologists work with people who do have concussions?
Well, you bring up again a lot of really important things, especially for the young student athletes that are perhaps in high school or middle school that are training and engaging in sports on a weekend basis. The fall is a terribly busy time for us in our practice because of the football injuries. But truly throughout the year we get a lot of requests for services, not only from football, which is where you commonly think of, but soccer and cheerleading.
Cheerleading.
It's cheerleading is not just standing on the sidelines with pom-poms anymore. We're talking about kids that are doing aerial acrobatics, being caught and sometimes caught incorrectly or being dropped and hitting their head on a hard basketball court or cement floor. Cheerleading injuries are actually a high frequency of the kind of concussion injuries that people receive. And the issue that we run into with the young student athlete is when can they be released to go back into play? In my day and your day, many years ago, you'd sit down on the bench for a little bit, the coach would tell you to shake it off, and then you're back into play.
Or as the announcers used to say, He just got his bell rung.
Yeah. Well, it was more than the bell, unfortunately. And the danger that we've run into is kids being returned to play before the brain actually has healed. Yeah. And one of the most devastating kind of injuries that you can get in the sports concussion field is what's called a second impact syndrome, where the brain is traumatized before it actually had a chance to recover. We had some incidents in our neck of the woods of kids several years ago being put back into play and getting a second impact and actually dying from the impact. So we owe a lot of appreciation to the professional sports, the National Hockey League and the NFL in particular, who have really led the charge in this and have created a lot of credible science behind the importance of allowing the brain to heal, and then also the trickle-down effect into the high school sports that we're seeing now.
Don, you mentioned a couple of key points, and that is returning too soon or having a secondary injury or concussive action or event. Talk to me very briefly about traumatic brain injury. How does this lead to that? And what could we say for parents or even students, maybe some of the things to be aware of?
Sure. The brain is a remarkable organ. It's if you're ever to actually touch a living brain, it's roughly the consistency of a stiff Jello. As you have this malleable gelatinous mass inside a very tough skull. And one of the types of injuries that you can get when the brain jiggles around in there is you can get bruising of the brain against the inside of the skull. And then, although it's somewhat of a gelatinous mass, it has different consistencies throughout it, so not all pieces wiggle at the same frequency. So therefore, the very fine nerve fibers and vasculature that innervate and irrigate the brain can actually shear and tear because they're moving at different rates. And so you can end up with not only localized injuries where the brain hits the skull, but also shearing and tearing forces throughout the brain that can cause considerable damage.
What's one thing that parents might want to look for in any type of an injury like this, especially with the little kids, so to speak? What's a suggestion that you may have?
Sure. A number of things are fairly obvious, and really, Rex, common sense dictates this. Blurred vision, where it didn't exist before, nausea, vomiting, dizziness, impaired speech would be a considerable sign. Difficulty staying asleep, difficulty sleeping at all after a traumatic impact.
And if a parent sees this, or a coach would see this, what should they do?
Immediately, their child should be seen by their primary care physician, who is really the gatekeeper of all of this. But one of the other pieces and where psychology plays into this, Rex, is although some of the physical symptoms can remit fairly quickly, many of the cognitive symptoms, slowing in processing, impaired attention, impaired concentration, really are not very obvious and can only be determined through appropriate testing, which is where we come into play and why we're considered as part of this legislation as professionals that will be qualified to release a child to go back to play.
Well, and Donald, thank you very much for visiting today. I appreciate it.
My pleasure, Rex. This is always fun for me.
Thank you very much. Dr. Donald McAleer from North Shore Neuroscience in Erie.